Brilliant. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Really looking forward to this session today. And I'll just briefly intro the session, what this is going to be. We've got kind of 43 minutes together, so thank you for putting aside some time for this. And really what we're going to do is we're going to dive into understanding leadership in the digital age. So we're going to draw on the expertise of Julian and myself and really make this a collaborative conversation. So Julian and I are going to have an open dialogue for about 25 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to a Q&A for the last 15 minutes too, to hear your thoughts and questions and make sure we can really tuck into it all together. Before we do, what I'm going to do is actually just briefly share my screen, because I'd love to get a read of the generations that we've got in the room today. We've got a mixture of cultures, so I'd love to see what kind of mixture of generations that we have too. So I'm going to invite you to either scan this QR code, or we'll pop into the chat too a very simple link just to be able to Pat's just popped it in, and you can just click on that link and select the generation, and then it will give us a visual and we'll be able to all share with you kind of the generations you've got in the room. So just clicking on that link that Pat's just sent in, or if you'd prefer to use your phone, you can scan the QR code too, and then we'll see what generations we've got in the house. Let's see if we get some early scores on the doors. Okay, so already we've got some millennials, some Gen Z, Gen X. Millennials are taking the lead at the moment. We'll give it literally one more minute for you to all vote. Okay, the votes are coming in live, thick and fast.
I think you can guess who the boomer is, Xavier.
That's true. That's true. Okay, brilliant. We've got a lot of millennials, but what I'm loving is that we've got a variety. We've got some people who have popped their generation in the chat too. So we've got another boomer, Gen X, baby boomer. Okay, cool. So we've got a mixture of people in the room today. So we'll just take that screen away briefly. But that's just good for us to know, so we can tailor what we're saying throughout to address the fact we've got a multi-generational room as well. So before we go any further, what I'd love to do is to allow myself and Julian to introduce ourselves, maybe in a bit of a different way, just through answering very briefly what actually inspires us and what are we focused on, rather than a CV of background, for us to really explain what our expertise and interest lays in. So Julian, I'd love to throw it to you first.
Well, sound, fundamentally. Starting off as a musician, I listen to the world in the way musicians do, sort of multi-track, very attentive listening. And so I had years working with brands, wondering why they don't listen to the way they sound. Mm-hmm. And came to the conclusion it's because organizations are full of people who don't listen. Mm-hmm. So this has become my passion. My mission on this planet is to regenerate the world's listening. That's mm-hmm. what it's all about for me. And I think if you look around at the state of the world right now, you might agree that's something we desperately need.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And just to then bring a piece from myself, so my background is really, and my interest rather, is really in understanding the digital native generations coming through. So everyone born from 1996 onward, Gen Z onwards, is considered digitally native. And I find it fascinating how technology is really changing the way we communicate, the way we think, the way we feel, also the way we lead too, which is the main part we'll be diving into in today's session. And so from my perspective, I'm really fascinated about how businesses can really understand digitally native generations, from the digital natives, our generation, understanding ourselves more effectively, but also those leading and managing digitally native generations to feel more in the loop, let's say, with what's going on in the world of work. What I'll do is I'll also briefly preface the term generational intelligence, because that's a really large part of what we do and what I focus on. And that is simply defined as the ability to effectively understand, empathize, and communicate across all age groups. And that's becoming an increasingly important skill as we have in the world of work, people working longer, but also coming in earlier. And yet, as the rates of technology are increasing at such rapid rates, the gaps in, let's say, expectations, communication, leadership are getting wider and wider too. And that last word, leadership, I would love to open up the conversation, Julian, by hearing what leadership means to you. It's a large word, and really curious to hear, what does that word mean to you?
Well, there's a whole basket of skills that are vital for leading, aren't there? So yes, strategy, decision making, and so forth. But a lot of them, when you get down to it, rest on effective communication, mm-hmm. effective speaking and listening in the workplace and outside of the workplace, of course. Mm-hmm. And it's quite interesting. I did a paper in 2013 for Google, actually, a white paper predicting that the shift from speaking and listening to the younger generation's preference for texting and what I call personal broadcasting was going to erode listening as a skill and cause all sorts of problems for organizations. And we've now got data in on this, and the data is worse than I even projected back then. There's so much of management which depends on listening and speaking, and these skills are atrophying. They're not even recognized as skills, actually, in many cases. There's virtually no training going on in listening at all. Not that much. I mean, I do talks to CEOs all over the world and ask them, how many of you use your voice in your work? Everybody. How many of you have had formal vocal training? About 1%. So, we have a shocking skill gap here. And these things are foundational in achieving all sorts of outcomes, inspiration, communication. Every aspect of leadership really relies on them.
That's really interesting. So we've taken leadership and moved it almost straight into the understanding that it's effective communication. And the question I have off the back of that is listening and speaking. So most people invest in speaking and really see that is a skill that can be developed. But listening maybe doesn't get as much attention, let's say. And I'd love to just briefly hear how you're finding that dynamic and maybe what are some of the, let's say, blockers as to why leaders don't invest in listening as a skill as frequently as maybe they would do to speaking, let's say.
Yeah, well, firstly, because it's not recognized as a skill. Yeah, it's commonly collapsed with hearing. Hearing's a capability, and we can all hear, well, at least 90% of the world can hear, because there's 10% who've got hearing damage, with 1 billion young people joining that queue, very sadly, through headphone abuse. We're going to be raising a large, very deaf generation of people who've been pounding loud music into their ears for hours and hours a day. And the effects of that will come home to roost, sadly. But let's leave that aside for a moment. We have a huge number of people who don't understand that listening is a skill. We don't teach it in school. We don't teach it in university. We barely train on it in business. I've done some research on this, and I reckon there's about $8 billion a year being spent on speaking training in the world. Listening, a couple of $100 million at the most. Okay. It's almost non-existent. And this is unbelievable to me, because great listeners make great leaders, poor listeners make poor leaders. And there was a recent study that found that only 1 in 12 employees, this was a LinkedIn thing, I think 14,000 employees, only 1 in 12 of them rated their leader as a very good listener. That's shocking.
And what do you sense the costs are to that, to an organization, when you don't have that listening foundation within a business, within how people are leading specifically? What's the cost of that?
Well, of course, it's got worse we've got 5 generations at work now, so we can talk about the intergenerational hurdles in a moment specifically. But overall, whatever you're thinking, dear listeners, about the cost of leaders not listening, it's way worse than that. Way more than $10 trillion a year being wasted by leaders not listening, which creates, it works through in things like miscommunication. And there's a study recently which found that in America alone, miscommunication is costing $1.2 trillion a year. It's a day a week per person of not understanding things, having to check back, wasting time doing the wrong thing, all that kind of wastage. And even bigger than that is the problem of disengagement, which, you'll be familiar with from your work, Xavier, but we know that younger people particularly are suffering more anxiety, stress, isolation, and so forth. And at work, that comes through in disengagement. People, if you don't listen to people, they stop caring, they stop bothering. Maybe they take the extra day off, or they leave and try and find another job. Staff turnover is a huge cost of not listening, because it costs, 10 to 12 times salary sometimes to replace somebody and train a new person up. So disengagement is absolutely massive. And then, of course, you've got people just going, oh, I'm not going to bother having that idea. I'm not going to make my voice, I'm not going to raise my voice in that meeting because nobody will listen to me. So the loss of innovation and impetus and passion and teamwork is astronomical, well over $10 trillion a year around the world.
Interesting. Yeah. Even you just saying that, it reminds me when you're talking about listening and how that actually ties into psychological safety. Actually, you just mentioned in terms of people not feeling I'm going to be heard, I'm going to be listened to. And there was an amazing project done with Google. It's called Project Aristotle. They found that the biggest determinant of high performing teams was not their seniority, was not their skill level, but how psychologically safe people felt to fail and to speak up. And so actually the ability to listen, as you're saying, is like quite a crucial foundation for people feeling that, to feel from the other person that they're going to be listened to and valued. And I think tying it into the topic of today of that leading in a digitally native world, and we've got generations growing up with a, let's say, more noisier world than ever, a louder world than ever, the ability to feel like you're going into a space where you're actually listened to, I think is incredibly valuable. And I also want to touch on how that links into multi-generational leadership. If we're, let's say, leading as one generation and we are not listening, and I love that we've kind of dived into listening straight through this, and because I think it is really important and very prevalent to, let's say, a lot of the challenges that are there. When we listen, we allow our assumptions and our beliefs to be questioned. It's actually, I would say, almost a vulnerable thing to do, to truly listen, to allow ourselves to listen to the other person and think, okay, I have this set of projections, biases, beliefs, maybe about this person or about what I want to do, how I want to take the company, how I want to lead this team. And by listening, I'm allowing that to be put into question. And I think what's really powerful about that is when we see some of the work that Pat and I do in large organizations, the biggest barrier can be that leaders aren't willing to have their beliefs questioned. They're not willing to be vulnerable and actually listen to what another generation may need. And I also think I think it also goes in reverse too, of other generations assume maybe that their standard mode of communicating, let's say how let's say Gen Z have grown up communicating, we may presume that that's how the generations would find the communication to be effective too. And so if we don't listen, we don't realize what each generation actually needs in communication as well. So just thought I'd build on that there, wondering what's that maybe sparked for you from me sharing that.
Definitely. Was two things here, actually. The first is the silos that you've just mentioned. So just thinking about the channels, we have a problem because people occupy different channels and they may very much prefer one to another. And we know what those are. I'm a boomer. Boomers quite like face-to-face. Then the generation below is email, very much so. And then as you go through down the generations, you move to instant messaging or, social media or whatever it may be. So there are different channels being preferred. And even people prefer to send in one channel and receive in another. So the etiquette of these things can get quite complicated too. And for the managers who tend to be older, this is quite a conundrum to understand not what to say to somebody, but how to get it to them in the first place. So we've got that problem with the generations, quite apart from style and vocabulary and those kind of things. But then, of course, you're so right when you're talking about leaders and listening and innovation. That relies on making mistakes. If it's not okay ever to make a mistake in an organization, that is going to be a static, dead organization. We've all had experiences, I'm sure, with leaders who bite the head off anybody who's got bad news. And that kind of ferocious leadership is fatal. You need to hear the bad news. You have to know what's going on. Otherwise, you don't know what's happening in your organization at all. And I had an experience years ago when I sold my business to a larger business, which in London was headed up by a really ferocious guy. Okay. To the point where people wouldn't bring bad news to him.
Right.
They started hiding it, just tucking it away and making up good news. And the effect was that company's financial results had to be restated for 3 years because they were nonsense, because they'd been claiming business they hadn't lost or hadn't won, or had lost rather, or hadn't won. It was absolutely disastrous. So it can be really fatal for an organization to have a leader who won't listen to bad news or to challenge. And we have, diversity is a common word that we all talk about these days. I mean, I know there's a backlash going on right now, but I think one of the most important forms of diversity is diversity of opinion. If you surround yourself as a leader with a team of people who think just the same way you do, that's so fragile.
Yeah.
We have that in, unfortunately, two of the three greatest powers in the world right now.
Yeah.
In Russia, if you disagree, you get thrown out of a window. In China, you get disappeared. In America, not quite so serious, but you will get sacked pretty immediately. So we have three very fragile organizations which have enormous power in the world, which are built on this model of nobody can disagree. And that's terribly dangerous.
Yeah, it's very true. And I feel when you just shared that, it makes me think about organizations that claim to be forward-thinking. Let's say we're a forward-thinking, innovative organization. And I think that often is focused on the product or the delivery, the service, rather than actually, if we think about what does forward-thinking actually means, it means that we're able to question our beliefs. It means that we're willing to be humble to the fact that we don't know necessarily what the future holds, and we need to take in a diverse amount of opinions as a result to get there. And one of the things that you just shared as well, which I like to share as like a little tip as a practical takeaway for some leaders that may be in the room today, is the importance of getting reverse feedback, of humbly going to those that you lead, to those that you manage, to ask for feedback on your leadership style. And I invite those that are in this room to almost consider how often they do that. When was the last time that you went to those that you manage, those that you lead, and said, I would love to create an intentional space, an hour in my diary next week for anyone to come in and give me feedback on how I could improve, how I could develop better as a leader, as a manager. And that's going straight to source. And often when we ask that question in large organizations, you get some tumbleweed roll through and some crickets chirps, because it's not a common thing to do, and leaders are busy, but actually it can save so much time understanding directly the needs of the people that you are leading. So I often find that can be a nice little practical tip for leaders. And I'd love to, sorry, go on if there's something you want to.
Well, I was just going to say, or even try the next time you have a meeting, try not saying anything. And see what happens. Set an agenda and sit back and then comment at the end, perhaps, and give your input at the end. It's wonderful to have a dynamic, charismatic leader, and that is the characters that tends to rise to the top, isn't it? People who are kind of slightly extrovert and very outgoing and confident and dominate. But that's very suppressive, very repressive. If you've got quieter people, I'm thinking of Susan Cain's wonderful TED talk about the power of introverts, quieter people in the meeting who need to be given space to have the ideas or to venture timorously their what may be absolutely brilliant idea. So it's very important to give space to that. Listening is inherently humble, because when I listen to you, I'm saying you're more important than I am at this moment. And that is one of the reasons why I think there's often an inverse relationship between seniority and listening, because many senior people aren't the most humble people in the world, and they prefer to be telling and speaking than asking and listening.
In the process of helping people become better listeners, so better leaders that are better listeners, what do you notice are the shifts in mindset that come as a result of opening yourself up to listen? So what kind of mindsets do you see that creates within the leader themselves?
Well, appreciation of the value of difference, I think, is one of the biggest ones. And being able to accept that somebody else with whom you profoundly disagree may be right in their world. You can have two people who profoundly disagree with each other and they're both right. Now we have this fictitious zero-sum game in the world where I make you wrong, that makes me feel better. Just look at the comments under any news piece or even YouTube video to see the degree of bile and even hatred that's out there. So the judgmentalism is really, it's obstructive to innovation and effective teamwork. People are all different. Everybody listens in a different way. It's one of the foundations of my work. And it's important to understand that, because if you can be humble enough to accept that this person in front of you, who's not you, operates in a different way, may have a different view that's countervailing to yours, but it may have validity. And very often, if you can validate that person, you know, Xavier, I don't agree with what you just said, but I can see why you believe that. That's very different from Xavier, that's crap.
Yeah.
Which is only going to create escalating conflict.
Sure.
So in terms of negotiation, conflict resolution, this is absolutely critical. And we, you know, there's lots of research now about the cost of conflict at work, of incivility, for example, masses of it. Now, I don't know if that's a generational thing. I tend to think it probably is a little bit. I would certainly posit, I don't know if there's any research about this, and you would know, Xavier, but whether boomers are politer people than Gen Z, I don't know. There's certainly a degree of informality in text-based communication, which has maybe changed some of the rules. But you know, civility is quite important. Giving people the space to be themselves and respect that.
Yes.
It's critical.
Yeah, it's a really good point that you've made, and I almost, to summarize it back in a way, I'm hearing that empathy is a massive thing that's born through that listening. And when you talk about also Gen Z and politeness or other generations, even there within itself, I would say politeness is a relatively subjective word in a sense to what is polite to one generation, and it opens up the conversation of what's effective communication for one generation against another, and how do we work effectively together. And I think one of the things that I also enjoy most about the work that we do is about how we can bridge that empathy, and within that generational intelligence is understand, empathize, and communicate across all generations. And even if I kind of bring some language to it, when we have different communication norms in organizations, say, we often hear that maybe younger employees are less likely to pick up the phone now than they used to be, or less confident in communication for certain instances. I like to kind of bring in some dialogue around why that may be, like understanding that some of these differences aren't from inherently personally or ego-driven places, but from conditioning. And so even in that, I'll bring the language into it right now. We're having synchronous, disembodied communication. Synchronous in that it's real time. You and I are speaking right now. It's disembodied in that we're not in the same room. But for human beings, we've grown up with synchronous and embodied communication as our norm, right? We've grown up with, as you said, baby boomers speaking in person. That has been the norm. And yet for digitally native generations, asynchronous, i.e. not in real time, so as you say, personal broadcasting, texting, social media services and platforms, asynchronous communication, and disembodied, i.e. more time not in person, screen time, as that kind of communication in our adolescent years. And so that's shaping how we perceive effective communication and leadership norms too. And I think when we start to understand that and we look at some of the reasoning behind it, we can start to then have more effective dialogue. But that does, at its heart, you're right, take listening as a skill too. And I'd love to hear, maybe building on that, when it comes to leading effectively in this digital age, you know, that we're exploring today. And I love that listening has really come through as such a key theme. I'm wondering, in building on that, what other qualities do you feel are imperative for the leaders in this room to understand and to know when it comes to leading, especially in this digital age that we have today?
Well, I think understand first and foremost, and I hate to repeat myself, it's understanding that listening is a skill. It's a skill which has got a huge return available to us, tens of trillions of dollars of return if we invest in it globally, not least for society, of course, and our family relationships. But let's focus on business.
Yeah, sure.
Huge return on good listening in teamwork, in leadership, across the organization. So the first thing is to acknowledge that listening is a skill. That's, you know, that my life at the moment is a constant battle against what I call a world in denial, because almost everybody thinks they're a good listener and almost nobody is. And so we have this enormous denial, wall of denial, where if you say to somebody, do you know what, Xavier, you're not a very good listener, that's not going to go down well. That's not going to have a good result, because people take it as personal insult. We all like to think we're good listeners. Almost nobody is, because they don't even know it's a skill. So that's kind of the basis of it. Consciousness, which is a word I use a lot in my work. And, you know, this is why I'm, you know, just launching my new course, The Sound Leader, which is all about this kind of stuff. because we need to get the message out there. We need to really bang leaders' heads against the wall and say, listening matters. And until we really resolve this denial of everybody thinking that they do listen when they don't, then it's a brick wall that's going to be in the way of all those tens of trillions of dollars of wonderful benefits in happiness, effectiveness, and well-being at work.
If I'm a leader and I've heard what you've just said, and I'm like, I've got loads of different platforms, I'm working hybrid most of the time, I'm working across generations, I'm super tight on time, Julian, I'm so stretched. How do I create the space to listen to my people? What would be your response to that?
Well, I think it's no trivial task to create a listening organization. And I talk about this quite a lot. You can't just send an email out saying, from next week, we're going to be a listening organization. Unfortunately, is not going to work. It has to start from the top. So you need management, the top tier, who are trained and brilliant at listening, because that encourages everybody downward. You suddenly open the floodgates. It's like a frozen waterfall unfreezing. Suddenly you get flows coming through. If people know that they're not going to get shot down, sacked, or otherwise lose out by coming up with an idea or challenging. So that's the first thing. And then there are all sorts of things in the middle that you've got to do, training. You would think about your workspaces. Are they very noisy? I mean, open planning, the whole world has been a disaster for concentration. And there's no research ever that's been published that finds that open plan is better for people. It's better for the budget, because you can cram more people into open plan offices than you can if they're in cubicles or otherwise separated. But it's not better for productivity. People can be as little as 1/3 as productive in open plan offices.
Right.
And so we need to start listening also to the spaces that we provide for people to work in. Workspaces are not healthy. They're not productive.
Yeah.
And that, again, is down to a lack of listening, because people aren't conscious of the noise. Well, the workers are, but the managers, who of course are tucked away in their own little offices, perhaps not so much. So there are many aspects of this that we need to work through in order to end up with an organization which can truly be described as a listening organization. I'd love there to be some sort of, in the future, maybe certification, a plaque that you can put on the wall. You can do it for your buildings, sustainability now. There are all sorts of plaques from BREEAM and LEED. And I just was involved in the launch of a wonderful new one called Sound Certification with a W. Brilliant things to make the workplace sound better. What about having one for listening organization? We're a listening organization. We're a gold listening organization. Wow. Fantastic. I would love to see that.
Yeah. Likewise, that'll be the day. We'll have to do another webinar when that happens and discuss what's going on there. But actually, I'm aware of time, so I'm going to invite people just to start to put in the chat some questions. And just before we do, I'll build on something Julian said, but to put in the chat some questions just for the next minute or so. And even if you're not putting in a question, looking at other questions that people have sent in, and give it a thumbs up if you like the question, so that we can make sure we get around to the questions that everyone in the room really wants to be answered. But what I'd love to just double down on here is, I think when it comes to also in this digital world, with generations coming through, what different generations need from leadership, I think is really interesting. And listening, I do agree, is going to be it's a bedrock of effective leadership. Things are built from that, whether that's empathy or innovation, etc. They come from a bed of being able to listen to the awareness of those things being needed in the first place. So I love that listening's really come through as a theme today. And I want to bring into a piece of data that maybe often shocks people, which is that Deloitte did this amazing study where they asked millennials and Gen Z in equal distances apart, so in the same kind of years of their career, what their primary career goal was. And millennials said that 53% of them said that having a leadership position in their business was their primary career goal. They did the same study, so a decade later with Gen Z at the same point in their career, and found that only 6% of Gen Z said that their primary career goal is to have a leadership position in their current organization. And that's almost just such a crazy stat to process, but what I find so interesting about that is kind of what's behind that. And I think very often for other generations, we would look, or generations would look towards leaders and go, do I want to do that job? Do I want to have that authority, that position? And I think our generation is now looking more towards leaders and going, do I want to be like that person? Do I want to live that life? And too often we look ahead and see leaders that fundamentally maybe don't listen. And when I say don't listen, I mean also to themselves. There's burnout that's very, like, let's say, prevalent. There is a disconnection to health, disconnection to feeling at one with your community and people around you. Someone just said their sound cut out for that stat very quickly, Lewis. It was only 6% of Gen Z said that their primary career goal is to have a leadership position in the business they work in. And that's compared to 53% of millennials who said that. So something's really changed. And I think when we start to unpack that, and I think listening is a lot to do with that, we start to realize what is needed by different generations. To be able to find out what is needed is the required skill of listening. So I like how that's interwoven quite nicely there. What we'll do is we'll go to the chat quickly. Let's see what we've got there. So we've got 5. We haven't touched on AI at all in this. Where do you see that fit in this dialogue? Is it an opportunity or a threat in terms of our human and leadership skills? I love that question. Thank you for bringing it in, Julian. I'll hand over to you. What's your take on AI in this conversation?
Well, I get asked this a lot, and I speak about it as well on keynote stages around the world, because I think with the decline that we're seeing in listening, I mean, it's not static, it's declining right now. We're losing a skill at the very moment when it becomes more important to us. AI can do a huge amount of great things. I mean, I use it every day. It'll be able to displace a large amount of text-based communication. And bear in mind, writing was only invented 5,000 years ago. You know, as you said earlier, I mean, the numbers are, Homo sapiens has been here for about 300,000 years, writing for 5,000, general reading, only maybe a couple of hundred really, because for a long time writing and reading were the province of the elites. So it's extraordinary that text-based communication has displaced speaking and listening to the degree that it has. I think AI can do a great deal of that. What I don't think AI will be able to do for quite a long time, if ever, is to create genuine human connection. You know, you and I have shared some experiences. Although we're very different, we were both born. We were children. We had parents. We grew up. We banged our knee when we were 6. You know, that nasty boy at school did, hit us, or whatever it is. We are a compendium of all these human experiences. AI will never have those. So I believe, and I rather hope, that there will always be a heart-based, spiritual connection between two human beings, which you won't get through email. You'll get it through speaking to somebody and listening, whether it's disembodied like this or even better, in person. And that's why, so many people who are about to be disintermediated in professions like law, accountancy, financial advice, real estate, where you can say, well, why do we need these people anymore when AI can do all that stuff much faster and almost no cost? The people who succeed and survive in those areas will be surviving because their clients love working with them. Because they have a trust-based human relationship, which is valuable to them, which may be based on a wonderful thing. Xavier, I know this isn't one of the houses that came up on the search, but I think you'll really like this because I know you. That human connection that is, I hope, irreplaceable, based on speaking and listening.
So in a sense, it's placing a premium on the human side through the technical side being amplified so much. And I think that's also really interesting when it comes to the way we think too, in terms of leadership in the digital age. Is the critical skills, the ability to think and be with people and lead and communicate effectively, are just being amplified in importance. And I think it's also really interesting, just briefly tying it back to listening, is when it comes to AI developing, I think a lot of people, from what I've gathered and the data is starting to show, people often use it to feel heard, to share their thoughts, to gather insights. And so actually it shows the innate need for us to feel listened to digest our thoughts with, let's say, a partner, but the partner is often becoming AI. And so the most effective leaders, I feel, are the ones that enable themselves to be that partner in, let's say, human form. I want to go up to Tori's point. There's a good thumbs up there of, I wonder how things like social media and algorithms are playing into this. We create an echo chamber and get played back what we already think and engage with. Are we losing the skill to to think critically and appreciate a different viewpoint through listening? It's a great point, Tori. Yeah, it kind of builds quite well on what we've just been speaking about. Julian, is there anything you want to add on?
Well, I do think there's an issue with social media. Largely, it's about the word distraction, because listening takes attention and it takes effort. And unfortunately, if you're looking at reels, that's not going to happen very much. I train people on what I call listening positions, which is listening in appropriate ways, and becoming conscious that you can listen in different ways, and where you are listening from, and asking, is this the most appropriate way I can listen in this conversation? That consciousness is very important. So I'm not pejorative about, listening in a kind of light, unfocused way. Distracted listening is fine a lot of the time, because we're very busy, we've got lots going on, there's that thing in our hand that's demanding our attention. Well, okay, if somebody's telling you a joke or a little story, or it's banter, but not if somebody's telling you something really important or pouring their heart out. That's the point at which you need to be conscious enough to say, hang on, let me just put this down. I'm going to listen to you properly. Sit down, look at them, and operate one of the tools that I train people on to help them listen effectively in that situation. So, I think becoming conscious of where we listen from is very, very important. And social media, unfortunately, I'm a big fan of TJ Power's new book about dopamine addiction in the world, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I mean, that kind of addiction to distraction is a really big problem, and we do have to find a way to counteract that.
Off the back of that, what would you share for the young people? We've got millennials and Gen Z in the room. What would you share for them as a piece of advice in terms of developing their leadership skills or listening skills or communication skills in an age where you have got so much noise, where you do have social media creating echo chambers, and the average Gen Z spends 5.1 hours a day on social media? So that's actually over a week, pretty much a full-time job. So I'd just be curious to hear from your perspective, to build on what you're sharing. Is there any kind of tips or piece of advice you'd give to the younger generation when it comes to effective communication in a digital age?
I strongly recommend having a little practice of silence in your life. Even if it's 5 minutes a couple of times a day, sit in silence with yourself. There are a lot of people now who are so used to distraction, they feel quite uncomfortable with silence. And that's a problem. It's very powerful in speaking. If you're not comfortable with silence, then you're going to be going, and you know what I mean, and all these things, because you can't stop. Whereas if you're comfortable with silence, you can just stop and leave it for a moment like that, So it's powerful in speaking, but it's even more powerful, of course, in listening, because listening requires real silence. And I'm talking about silence inside as well as outside. Not saying anything. Well, that's the first thing. So if you're an interrupter, I'll give you a little tool for that. Get into the practice of taking a deep breath before you speak every time. And while you're doing that, you might just realize the person in front of you is still speaking. Gives you that moment to realize that. So it's very important that we develop just a few useful habits. That's one. Silence is definitely another one, because the silence inside is equally as important. Not doing what Stephen Covey described as listening to respond, or what I talk about as speech writing, which is, while this noise is going on in front of me, that's you speaking, I'm actually composing my next brilliant bit of monologue. And that's not listening either. So silence is the foundation of it. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, a couple of times a day. You don't have to meditate, just sit in silence and get comfortable with it.
Yeah, beautiful. That links actually quite nicely to someone's question, which was what's a daily practice that people could have. And so I think you've kind of hit a couple birds with one stone there. And I want to build on it also in terms of an analogy I like to use. It's a bit kind of, let's say, dystopian and let's say Black Mirror-y, but is that when we're not listening, I almost like to see it as we have this, let's say, this cable that comes out the back of our head and then projects a little screen in front of us. And so we think we're talking to the other person. We think we're communicating with the person in front of us, but actually we have this whole set of beliefs, opinions, overstimulation, clouding our ability to see the other person. And then we often have the other person also too, with that screen out. And so rather than communicating with each other, we're communicating with an idea we have about each other that we formed up here. And so I love that you mentioned that silence piece, ability essentially to help us see that we've got the screen and pop it potentially back in there. And I think when it comes to the generational conversation and the differences we're seeing too across the workplace and across the world at the moment in terms of different value systems, expectations, one of the most effective things we can do is to pop that back, because we often come in with a set of assumptions, a set of beliefs that then get in the way of how we communicate. Fundamentally, that communication then gets in the way of how we lead and how our organization performs. So it all builds on each other quite nicely. And I'm aware of time, and I'd love to just invite us to consider, actually, we'll go to that question that Dia's put, which is a really nice question. We've got a few thumbs up for that. What leadership qualities do you think will become more valuable in the next decade as tech continues to grow? That's a really nice question for us to end on and open up. So I'd love to throw it to yourself.
Well, my answer is very predictable, Xavier.
Yeah.
Listening would be the biggest one.
Sure.
I mean, speaking as well, but ignoring these skills is going to be a disaster, with tech taking up more and more of the bandwidth and there being more and more distraction and so forth. I do think there's a ray of hope in audio input, output, audio interfaces, which are going to come very, very quickly. I mean, we're all used to Hey Siri and Hey Google and whatever. Well, they're pretty dumb. But within a couple of years, we'll be talking to something that's very intelligent. I mean, you can already talk to ChatGPT in a fairly natural way. Claude hopefully will add that very soon. And that's going to change the weight that we put onto this channel. I think we'll get perhaps less obsessed with using our fingers and our eyes to communicate and get back into the habit of using our mouths and our ears a lot more. So hopefully that'll help things.
True. Thank you. I'd love to share one piece from my side on that question too, which is that I think in this conversation, one of the words that I'd love to bring in is the word integrity. I think for leadership in the digital age, integrity is so important, i.e. embodying what you say, owning what you say and how you lead as a leader. I think we're becoming better BS detectors, not just as a generation, but as a society. We've got fake news, false promises, trust in institutions collapsing quicker than ever. And I think when we look to leaders, the ones that we resonate with the most are the ones that have that integrity. They say what they mean and mean what they say, and you can feel that. And it's also something that you said about listening. When you're listening from your body, your heart, rather than just up in the mind, you can feel that from someone. You can feel the resonance, the truth of what they're saying, and you're inspired to be led. And I think, just to answer Dia's question, I think that's going to become even more critical as time goes on, when we have an increasing amount of noise. I don't think the noise is necessarily going anywhere, and we've got so much uncertainty. And I think people often, leaders can make promises. We want to have a level of certainty to communicate that we know this is what we're doing. I think one of the most powerful things I've seen leaders do is go, I don't know. I actually don't know, but this is my intention, this is my direction, this is my set of values and principles with which I want to lead us into that uncertainty together. And I think that's an incredibly powerful skill set. On top of this, the listening piece that we've discussed, I think they're interwoven very nicely, is that word integrity. So that would be the final piece that I want to add on there too. But that leaves us essentially just to say thank you so much for all of your time. I want to respect your time. I know there's still more questions that we haven't got around to getting into. I'm sure Julian and I will do another one of these somewhere down the line and get back to all these questions. But for now, just to say thank you for putting aside this time. And please do feel free to stay in touch with both of us on LinkedIn or via email. And wishing you a lovely rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining.
Bye-bye.